and I want to go into my topic for today, which is an extension from last night and the past few weeks. The thing that I want to talk about as I'm finishing my talk on the word Torah, it is something that is ineffable, that we can't fully articulate it. First, I want to say a quick word about words in English that are not transparent and have a core meaning that cannot be analyzed down into other meanings. Now, this idea was first really carefully articulated by the British philosopher of language, G.E. Moore. And G.E. Moore wrote this book about 1900. This was before, it developed into Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein, but people began to understand language as a kind of a game that the native speaker knew. So how do you know what a word means? You watch how people use the word, what kind of meanings they're trying to communicate. And of course, they discovered that there are words that refer something to in the natural physical reality. And then there are words of value. And sometimes words of value can reduce into just a couple of core words. And philosophy, in his opinion, and I think as well, has wasted a lot of time trying to define words that are core words of the language. And for me, some are love, justice, truth and beauty. I would include the word the good. So when people try to define the good, the utilitarians, they would say, well, the good is social value, social utility. And of course, no one can actually describe what social utility is. There's no consensus. So even the word social utility, it sounds like it names something until you try to bring it down to cases. And how does it help you teach another person what to do? So a person says, should I cheat on the test? You say, well, is there social utility in cheating on the test? The person says, yeah, I'll pass the class and I'll make a lot of money, I'll pay a lot of taxes, and that'll benefit everybody. Well, it's very hard to critique that argument. So we don't even know what social utility is. The person says, well, if everybody lied, then that's not social utility. The person says, I'm not going to tell anybody I teach. I cheat. I'm just telling you. So is there social utility in having a private contract for you teaching, so you graduate, make a lot of money, pay a lot of taxes? So if you notice that when we try to talk about something like that good is social utility is something completely different. In fact, a person could say, I contribute to society, but person's not a good person because they do it in a criminal way. So putting all that aside. So the idea is that there are words like the good, the beautiful, the just, the true, the divine, that cannot be broken down into other words. And since they cannot be broken down into other words, the meanings can't be verified, I find it useless to argue about the meaning of the words. And I've seen people say, well, what do you mean by the good? What do you mean by God? And one says, I have a meaning that I use when I'm speaking. I oftentimes say an experience that I'm trying to communicate. And it's not something I can define. I can just tell you how I use it. And I want to recommend that to all of you. For example, when people say, do I believe in God? I almost always say, I believe I have experience of God. And I don't believe I'm manufacturing them from within. So when I say the word God, does it refer to something that is not I? Yes. Am I referring to something that I experience? Yes. So when people say God inside, they of course don't mean empirically inside, naturally inside. They mean an inner life experience. And sometimes when we're very careful with the way we use a word, we help other people communicate the word. A person just told me that he had become an avowed atheist. He didn't like any supernaturalism. And I said, okay, so how do you find good and bad? Social utility, utilitarians. And he said, I said, well, do you have a value system? Even though it's not rooted in God or the supernatural, says, I have a value system, it's about social utility. I said, okay, does it include things like courage? Does it include things like self-sacrifice? I mean, does it have other words that are not directly usable for social utility? He thought, says, yeah, I have a value system. And I said, but it's not verifiable that those words actually mean anything. They don't refer to anything. So, and value systems are non-falsifiable. Meaning if I have a value system, you can't say for me, that's a bad value system because it's my value system. Now, once I have my own dogmatic value system that cannot be falsified like an empirical thing, it's a belief system. And a belief system typically means I believe in things that are not empirical, not natural, such as values. So even when people say they don't believe in God, they don't believe in anything supernatural, metaphysical, they typically believe, oddly, in the independent meaning of values that cannot be reduced to another word. And the question is, since we use a word, for example, like courageous, in a similar way, and do all we English speakers know what that refers to? It's a philosophical question. Does it exist? Or is it simply our trying to describe something that doesn't exist? Does a word refer to something that we don't actually know, but that's as close as we can get? So I want to give this introduction about use of language, because when we sometimes get philosophically and religiously befuddled trying to define words. So all of this has been an encouragement to you. Don't spend time defining words of value, including core value, love, justice, truth, beauty, the good, the holy, etc. But watch how you use the words and what inner life experience is being created by the words, because as we use these words of value, something happens inside of us. And that's why it's important that we study Torah, the Tao, read poetry, etc., because we are awakening, I'm going to say this is in the soul, we're awakening in the soul a world of meaning that is not awakened unless we use these words with great intentionality, with great kavanah. So this is when people use these words, let's even recite blessings, but there's no kavanah behind it, there's no intentionality behind it. For example, we all say, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, God. And I've said many times, if you actually meant that, think how long it would take you to say it. That if you were to say Baruch, whatever that means, and the atah is God, you don't go right over that atah. Try to imagine the divine is right in front of you. And you're looking at the divine. The divine's looking at you. You don't rush past it. Now, I'm not saying we can all do that. I mean, the Siddur is filled with the word you, and we can't fully intentionally mean, we can't mean every one of them. But as well for us to focus, and sometimes when you're looking at a bracha, pick that word you and see what happens in your inner life when you deeply mean the word. So this is the conscious mind doing a very strange thing, using words to communicate with the unconscious, which is where the soul exists in a metaphoric sense, and something is awakened. It's a very mysterious thing that I don't think anyone can define. Now, in other teachings, I've talked about things like, hold on just 1 second. I need to, thanks. In other teachings, I've been talking about resilience and the will and so forth, and I said I'd talk a little bit more about the will today. So Assaad Jolie begins in his book, The Act of Will, and again, we can't fully define the will. It's a core word. We all experience the word. We don't fully know what the word means, but we have this mysterious experience of the word when we try to will ourselves to do something and we find we're not able. So Assaad Jolie in the book, The Act of Will, it's a wonderful book with great precision, but in the first few pages of the book, he says something like, the will is a mystery. It's a mystery why you can call up the will to do something, but really not have the will. You give up very quickly. And then one day, you've actually decided. Something happened inside of you. Now, it's not that conscious sense of, I am deciding now, and then the will's not going to continue, I'm going to fail. And there's something where when one says, I will it, you know it's set. Something fundamentally has transformed inside of you. Now, we can't define these things. What I'm suggesting are only metaphors. But I know this to be true. Assaad Jolie talks about this. Roberto Assaad Jolie, by the way, for the uninitiated. He talks, there's many different kinds of will. For example, the strong will, just to power through something. The skillful will, which is the best usable will, which means we've taken what we want to do and broken it down into many very incremental skills. That's part of my teaching on character and wisdom works, is breaking down moral and spiritual goals into incremental tasks, and that one tries to achieve one step at a time. Because if you try to achieve the whole thing at one time, that's just the strong will, you're going to fail. Assagioli says, break every act of will into a set of skills. And then there's a part of the book where he talks about, very interestingly, how images shape the will, how the will shapes images. I think he has 15 different laws of the psychological laws of the will, and it becomes almost a kind of a calculus. Hold on one second. Okay. We just had an interference. It becomes, when you look at his 15 psychological laws of the will in the book, The Act of Will, it itself, when you put the 15 together, by the way, Yud He in Hebrew is the word of God, the name of God. He was Jewish and did know some Kabbalah. I'm not sure if that was what he meant when he had the 15 psychological laws of the will. But again, they're trying to describe something that names something that we do automatically. He wants to show us what we're doing. For example, when you will something, certain images come to mind. And when you want to will something, you put an image in your mind to activate the will. Okay, so let's say you want to, I don't know, play tennis well. So you say, you have an image of yourself on the tennis court and what you'll be able to do, and the image can propel you toward that. And sometimes you see a good tennis player and the image comes in, and then you have the will to go and learn. Again, it's a very mysterious process. So with this idea of the act of will, referring to something very mysterious in the unconscious regions, that the conscious mind, okay, the conscious mind is using words and the many things Assagioli talks about to activate the will, but it's not predictable. So I've known people that, for people like me that teach many different things, and then we have collapses. Sometimes we suffer from depression. Sometimes we lose meaning in life. And so when I look at this, I realize, for me, I've set goals, I've mastered skills, but I haven't invested time in the will. So the strong will, the battery, as it were, that I produced to propel myself through life, the battery wore out. So whenever I suffer, I go into some kind of a funk, some kind of gray zone, some way that I'm not being a very focused person. Here's my diagnosis. I haven't been going down and into my soul and activating my will. And here's one reason that I talked about in my Shabbat thought. Sometimes the things we decide to do in life wear out. Some things we decide to do in life didn't come from the authentic self, and they run their course. Sometimes people give us advice, and we try to do it and realize it wasn't inherent to me. I know a young man where every one of his father's friends gave him a different advice of what he should do with his life. And he said, you're all giving me great advice, but you're all giving me different advice. And so I would rather learn, I coached him to say, I would rather you tell me how I can take anything that you're doing, because the words sound good and I'd like to do any of them, and go into myself and find out the inner life process of achieving that. Then I talk about people who have tried to do something and it just gave out. And it just gave out for a couple of reasons. One is it's not authentic to them. They were doing something, even belief systems just wear out sometimes. They got us through a certain part of life and then they just feel empty. They've lost their full deep tone. Now, that doesn't mean that the basic religious system or value system does not have truth to it. But as we grow, we need to re-articulate it so that it is more connected to the authentic self. Now, the authentic self itself goes through many stages of development that the conscious mind is barely aware of. So in this process of activating the will, it is connected to the authentic self. Again, that's a metaphor. It's a word that we can't fully define. But when I say the authentic self, most people can see themselves in moments where one says, I wasn't authentic. I was pretending. I did it, I said it, I thought it. It was not aligned to me. What a mysterious experience. To know that something you're saying, something you're doing, does not come from a place of inner truth. So again, another mysterious word we can't define. What does inner truth mean? It certainly doesn't mean they have their truth, which sometimes means a version of events. I don't mean that at all. So the will, words of value, authentic self, the soul, metaphorically, I put them all here. I put my conscious mind up here. I put my ego self here, where the passions and feelings. And then I put the deep inner life kind of topographically right about here. And when I do my meditation, most of it has to do with managing my emotional life, my ego states. Sometimes it has to do with managing the mind, especially as I learn new concepts and try to stretch myself into new ideas. But for me, my deepest contemplative practice is going down into the world of the soul. The soul is living its own life. I think the authentic self is connected to the soul. So whenever I feel disconnected, whenever I feel myself, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I should be doing this. I do a check-in with my soul, and I have to make sure that my soul is connected to that toward which I am striving. And I'll conclude by saying when Sahaja-Yoli talks about the stages of the will, the first stage, you can memorize this, Pag-Imai, P-A-G-E-M-I. Anything you are considering doing, even if it's overcoming depression, overcoming resentment or anger, that's something that is worthwhile doing. Or anything in the observable life, studying something, anything you decide to do, as Sahaja-Yoli says, what's your purpose? Asks you for these 6 words. What's your purpose? What's your aim? What's your goal? Now, these words are similar, they're synonyms, but something I found is when you use a few different words to refer to something, different words actually work better for some people than others. So the word purpose for me feels like life purpose, a life of meaning. Aim for me is something sharp, and the goal might mean what the aim will lead to. That's just me. So when I read Sahaja-Yoli, I thought to myself, I don't expect him to define these words for me, although he does. I want to figure out my own definition as I contemplate doing anything or continuing to do something. What is my purpose? What is my aim? What's my goal? And then the Imai is evaluation. Let me deeply evaluate this purpose, aim, and goal. And to evaluate, something like giving it value, and of course value is an operation of the soul. So evaluation, we can mean to evaluate where something is right or wrong, good or bad, in a functional sense. But we many times fail in the striving of the will because the valuation has not gone to a deep place. So to evaluate spiritually means to take whatever it is and assess its value in the world of the soul. Now remember, the soul is mute. The conscious mind can connect with the soul, but the soul oftentimes communicates back in intuitions. For example, I think moral, spiritual intuitions is the language of the soul. Other languages of the soul are music, poetry, and so forth. But whenever I'm speaking to the soul, I'm not waiting for words. I'm waiting for something to arise that I have to translate into words. So when people say, does God talk to me? I say, well, sometimes I have an experience, and the experience is utterly real, but then I have to translate the experience. So try to imagine evaluating as taking something down into the inner realms and seeing if it's something that your inner life is committed to. Now, sometimes as we work through things in their conscious life, that has an effect on the unconscious life. Again, another strange thing I can't account for. The worthwhile things I do, thoughts that I think in my conscious life have an effect on the soul, and then the soul has an effect on the conscious life. It's very dialectical. I believe it's true. I've examined myself enough to know that I'm authentically describing something that I know happens within me. My conscious mind gives tasks to the soul, and sometimes my soul gives tasks to the conscious mind. Sometimes when I'm working through something, I wake up one day and say, well, I worked it through. What happened? Well, the soul did its work and then communicated to the conscious mind, you're done with that, you can move on. But how did my soul do that work? Because up in my conscious mind, I'm working hard on it. So many, many years ago, I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to work on this in my conscious mind. I'm going to hand it over to my soul, leave it alone for a bit, and see how my soul works it through and delivers this knowledge back up to me. So in Assagioli's 6 words that he starts out in the stages of the will, purpose, aim, goal, the 4th word, evaluation, is a very deep word that cannot be precisely defined, although I believe the more deeply you use the word, it refers to something that really happens inside of us that we can't precisely define. The next of the PAG-EMI acronym, motivation, again, another very strange word we can't precisely define. Why? Because motivation gives out. We feel motivated, we feel we want to move in a certain direction, and then we just become listless and we ask ourselves what happened. One thing that happens is it wasn't authentic. It wasn't really something that the soul cares about, or we did not cultivate the will enough to actually create and assign the energy to something that was worthwhile. How do you know? Well, only through spiritual work. Again, I think if I'm motivated to do something that's going to be difficult, I go and in a way, I begin this conversation with my soul to determine whether the soul, again, in some undefinable sense, is going to deliver up the energy for me to continue it in a wise and skillful way, but at the same time, nourish my soul, which is the last thing I'll talk about. And then Assagioli uses the word intention. I don't want to talk about today. So now the idea of funding the soul with power. So we have this, the power in the soul. I talked last night and this morning that the idea of a blessing, one meaning of the word blessing is to be infused with power. So let's try to imagine that you have things you want to do in life, goals in life to accomplish, inner life goals to accomplish, and you find yourself worn out, that you feel just kind of gray inside. How do you fund the soul? Here I'll give you 3 ideas. One thing is conversations of meaning with other people. Sometimes our conversations, we tend to exchange information, we might have our gossip partners, but we're oftentimes not careful enough. I know this probably doesn't apply to most people who are here today, but many people don't make sure they have time to have discussions like Torah study, like Bible study, like a spiritual poetry group that Shanti talks about all the time. We actually don't make time for these things because they don't seem to have a direct utility. I mean, if it's not that fun, why do you go? I think we engage with holy text with other people because it actually vitalizes the soul. It's as if we are blessing the soul with power by engaging in holy words with other people. Now, can you read a book, hear a lecture? Absolutely. Another way that I know I fund my soul is to not work on anything that I have to get done. We call this Torah Lishma, studying the Tao for its own sake. I have to make sure that some part of my day is studying not connected to a class or a goal. How do I know what to study? It's another mystery. Sometimes I get up, I say, well, I'll study Bible tomorrow. By the way, I've been studying 139. Amazing. I hope you all study it. So I studied it for a couple of days, and it was just really, really deep about the intricacies of the inner life. And I put my Bible out with my pen, all ready to go, got up, I went there, I sat there, and I thought to myself, I'm not in it. Something happened. Why can't I study Psalm 139? That as I rediscovered it became part of my inner canon, the most important thing I ever read. And within about 5 days, my soul said, "Genug, enough." And so I had to sit and say, okay, what do you want me to study? And I just had to go in and listen, not to what my mind wanted to know, but what my soul wanted to experience. So I just waited for my soul to speak, and it came down to music. It came down to listen to a couple of really odd pieces of music. Okay, I'll be self-revelatory and tell you. There's a very obscure song that the Beatles do called Flying. Okay, I'm going to look down at my screen to see if anybody, when I say flying, does the song come to mind? Anybody? Okay, it's probably the most obscure. It's an instrumental, no words to it. It's a very quiet melody, and I remember I think it's on Abbey Road or the White Album, one of those, maybe Revolver, maybe actually Rubber Soul, I don't know. But I remember I listened to it. I said, "This is so odd. This is not Lennon and McCartney. This is not one of those catchy tunes." And I listened to it over and over again, and it's a meditative journey. So I sat at a kitchen table, this was last week, and I'm hearing the song in my head, and then I played and said, oh, wait a minute, I'm flying to Israel on June 23rd. My soul is working through that. I mean, that's a big, big thing that, we've talked, we've purpose, aim, goal, evaluation, motivation, intention. We've worked it out, and we can't grind those numbers anymore. It's the decision we've made. We're looking forward to the adventure, and of course, keeping all the beautiful things that we are doing. My soul, my mind's worked it out. My soul has barely begun. My soul has barely begun. So I listen to my soul. My soul has the idea of we're flying. We're flying. So if you want to listen to a very obscure piece of Beatle music, look up Flying. It's just a meditation. It's a wave-like meditation. And once you know the song and know the music, maybe one day you'll be sitting and say, God, I'm trying to read something important. I'm ready to try to read Popular Mechanics, trying to study, do something. And your soul goes, nope, 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 nope. You're forcing yourself. Don't. Just tune in. Listen. And you go inside. Again, it's a mysterious thing that I can't define. My soul tells me what it wants to experience in order to regenerate. So all the things we've been talking about lately, especially blessing from last night, the idea of resilience and transformation, many, many topics. What I said I would eventually do is talk about the mystery of the will. This might be the first time I've actually tried to talk about it because it is mysterious. So I hope you've enjoyed my first foray into this topic. I'm going to let my soul think about it a lot more and give you another version probably in a few weeks.